This flower is so fragile and it blooms in autumn. Cosmos Flower Painting Tutorial. Mixing watercolors, adding water to my palette and starting with lemon yellow, together with little touch of alizarin crimson and ultramarine blue. These three pigments will help me mix gray watercolor mix, adjusting these three pigments until I have a nice gray watercolor mix, adding a little bit of more alizarin crimson, a little bit of ultramarine blue, not lemon yellow, just more of red and blue watercolor mix. Separately, ultramarine blue together with sap green. I see in my reference photo of this Cosmos flower that there are lots of blue and green, really transparent watercolors. Third mix is sap green and manganese violet, which gives me greener gray watercolor mix. Again, all these watercolors are super light and transparent. I'm placing Indian yellow separately for the middle part and Perylene violet, just a little touch for those little stamens that we see on flower. Starting with flower head, taking elastic eraser and removing excess amount of graphite off the paper surface. And I go over with my white eraser. This is like eraser pencil, but there's simple white eraser inside, and I'm erasing lightly even more. This is white subject, so all thick and dark graphite lines will be visible. We don't want that. It will only make this not so neat looking painting result. But when you are erasing, be sure that you are doing this super lightly. We don't want to damage paper surface. Here are watercolor mixes and pigments that I will be using in the sketchbook, painted out watercolor mixes. This is always nice to practice in sketchbook where you can add more information. Let's start painting process. I will be using finer tip brush, and I want to state this out. Layers of watercolors will be so light. We are building white flower really gradually and concentrating only on the shadow areas in the reference. We don't even need to look at the white areas. White is our paper. White surface on this flower, on petals, is white paper. So we don't need to paint that. We don't need to add any white pigment. We are thinking about the shadows, cast shadow areas, some marks, some lines. There's a lot of fine lines on this beautiful fragile Cosmos flower. And if we look really closely and accurately, we will notice that this white flower is reflecting so many colors that surround it at the moment I took a reference photo. There are blue pigments, there are violets, there are green, gray. The more we will add information to this flower, the richer and realistic it's going to look. And I'm taking watercolors from little corners of my watercolor mixing, these puddles that we have, and I'm taking just a little amount. From in the beginning it looks like I'm almost painting with invisible layers, but it's not. I'm not aiming here after first layer for some vividly looking results, some realistic results. I know that I'm building layers, and after, closer to the end, it will all make sense. It will all end up with beautiful white fragile flower on the white surface. It's always interesting how watercolor artists are getting those white subjects on white paper without any white pigment. And here it is. In this tutorial, gradually we are building white flower, thinking about shadows, thinking about different color tones. White subjects are reflecting everything because it's white. If there are some leaves right beside, it will reflect green color. If there are skies above, it will reflect sky color on the petal surface. For example, maybe there are some red flowers around. If that would be a bigger composition and there would be some other colored flowers, white flower is reflecting everything. And that is our help to paint it. Here I'm using a lot of mix where ultramarine blue together with sap green, this really light turquoise watercolor mix. I see it quite a lot on the petal surfaces, and also I started from the shadow areas, especially where one petal is overlapping the other, and casting shadow on the lower part petal. That is my go-to to start with white flowers. Do it gradually, paint it slowly, don't rush. With white flower, no need to rush. Not with any flower is good to rush, but still, white flower especially is waiting for your patience and gradual applying of super transparent layers. Using watercolor mix of sap green and manganese violet. It has something of green, something of gray, but again, it's so light and so transparent, and my changes in flower appear really slowly and even hard to tell from the screen because the colors are so light. And in the beginning, I really trust the process. I also don't see that it looks like reference, that the white flower is appearing from my white paper surface, but I trust the process that with many layers, super fine lines, different watercolor mixes, I will get to the point that this flower looks realistic on white surface. Here I'm adding slightly intense watercolor mix in the little gaps at the center where petals are attached to the center part. In the reference, I noticed that these little gaps are showing through something that is behind what we see of these petals, and this is helping me to separate petals and to add some extra information to this painting. Also, when painting white flowers, or if you're searching for a nice white flower reference, it's nice to have maybe some spots for the first time that you are painting, or maybe some lines, textures on the surface. This will definitely help build a realistic and natural looking subject. Extra information except of the white surface is super helpful in painting white subjects. Here, these are those fine lines, some little darker gaps between petals, of course the center part that we will be painting later, maybe some cast shadow areas. Everything is helping me to build a realistic flower. Now let's leave petals a little to rest and take Indian yellow with the same finer tip brush. Apply on the center part, washing my brush, and I'm smoothing the applied layer. I also want to start transparently. I don't want to go straight with super intense yellow pigment. Start slowly is always a nice way to be more confident and to not make mistakes in the first touches. Perylene violet for those little, those are like anterns, little anterns on the center, in the center part of this cosmos flower, and I'm adding them with the very tip of my brush, so they are really small, and I'm looking in the reference and seeing the direction how they are formed. In the front, the lower part that we see, these are just dots because they're facing us, and at the upper part they're longer parts, the same we see in the reference as well. I'm not going in too much detailing here. I will add some details, some nuances, just to make the illusion that there is the center part, there are these stamens. This is a small piece of painting to be super detailed with those stamens, but of course you can try, you can push your limits of painting and observation skills a little bit further and add some extra details, add some extra attention to this center part of Cosmos flower. painting green part of this cosmos flower. It's optional. You can leave just a study of white flower and write all the notes that you explore during this painting session, or you can also add the green parts, which are even super fragile than the flower. I'm mixing sap green with lemon yellow. Also will add a little bit of perlin green, and starting straight with watercolors. I'm not applying water, painting here with the very tip of the brush. If you have small super fine brush, use it, because here are those stem and those little leaves of this flower are super fine, and we want to keep them that way. It is all this, keeping this characteristics looks of this exact subject is helping us building this more natural and realistic result. When people look at our painting, they see that, yeah, this is cosmos flower, something so fragile that we see during autumn time and not mistaken for some other flower. Adding perlin green, and we have here a really beautiful bud looking straight at us. For the middle part, I'm taking a little amount of alizarin crimson together with lemon yellow and a touch of green mix that we already have on the color palette. And this is more closer to the reference that we see. Always experiment with watercolors that you have. Starting to apply from the outer edge of the center with little brush strokes, washing my brush, cleaning in paper towel, and now smoothing closer to center part, which is much lighter, and then the very center, that dot, is slightly darker. These super fine and thin leaves of cosmos flower are a little bit darker than the stem. If we look in the reference and really carefully study them, compare stem to the leaves, we see that they are different in color tone and tonal value. Also, as you can see, I'm painting super accurately with the very tip of my brush, so that where they are crossing each other, I have some lighter and darker areas to separate them, to make it look that all this movement there is, and it's not just a lot of fine lines. We need to create this look that these are leaves and not just different lines on the paper. You don't need to rush here. It's almost finishing part. We almost close to the end, but it's also important to pay as much attention as you did for the flower, also for this green part. If you don't have patience anymore, then just leave the flower as it is and write all the notes that you need. You can take a rest and come back relaxed and paint further this green part. Because the poorly painted stems and leaves will super be visible, even if your flower is so beautiful and detailed, but poorly painted other parts will catch the attention even more than the beautiful flower. Applying shadow on the right side of these little leaves around flower bud. And as I paint super transparently with super small amount of water, my layer dries super quickly. And I'm taking a razor and carefully, without any pressure, without any rubbing of the paper, I'm erasing graphite lines that are still visible around flower, around these green leaves and stem. As I erase graphite, painting looks more neat and accurate, and I also notice the areas that I haven't painted, and I'm adding more with my finer tip brush. More attention to this little piece that is beautifully looking straight at us, separating with a little fine lines of slightly darker watercolor mix. Again, these lines should be really thin. I see in the reference that there are these separations, and applying shadow on the outer part of the center. This is so small and tiny work. Maybe you have an enlarging glass, you can use it just to be sure that those brush strokes are so small, and it's definitely more dry brush technique. The water, if there will be a lot of water, you can't make so small and precise brush strokes. So a really small amount of moisture on my brush, more watercolor mixes which are still transparent, and accuracy. Adding final touches, a little bit of perylene green to my mixing palette, and I'm applying really thin line on the right side of these leaves to give a little bit of tonal value and contrast for the shadow parts, even in those so small leaves, so tiny and thin. More accurate work and more effort, this study will look more natural and three-dimensional on a flat piece of paper. I really learned a lot during this autumn practice and these paintings. Hope you too. Hope you learned something new and enjoyed the process. Thank you for watching. Here's the finished sketchbook study page. Thank you and see you in my next tutorials. Have a wonderful autumn time.